So at the end of the last episode, Edwin wanted to know what are some of the frustrations and experiences and challenges that you'll have starting a new worshiping community. Some of the challenges I had are because of mistakes I made that I wouldn't do again. For example, I was so desirous of implementing the vision I felt I had and that made sense and maybe was blessed by God with, that I didn't have partners. You know, I had a couple
you didn't
buddies.
have a team.
I didn't have a team, and that was not good from an innovation standpoint because I didn't get a chance to fully think things through. I think it was about my own stubbornness, but I also, you know how politicians, if they get a big donation from someone, then they have to follow them and vote in a way that's favorable for them. Or when, back in the days when I started the church, you know, the big thing was new church developments. And so a couple churches would give you some money, and then your regional organization, and you had all these people to whom you were accountable.
Yeah. And
I kind of wanted to be accountable to God, and I wanted to be accountable to myself, but nobody else.
And to the community that you're serving.
And to the community, sure. And that was a mistake, and that was very, very lonely, you know. And you know, the beauty was my wife Jean was incredibly supportive throughout the process, but it was a very lonely enterprise. Second, because I funded it myself, you know, I just wouldn't recommend that. You know, it just it allowed me to be true to myself, but from a financial standpoint, it just was not wise, and happily you're not in that situation. I would also say that it's kind of like being in the desert and just wondering if you're crazy. Because I had been blessed with an awesome education. A couple guys, Bill Enright, Charlie Alcorn, were incredible mentors for me. I had about every single blessing that a seminarian, Ray Bowden was another guy, every blessing that anybody could ever have going into the ministry. And what I basically did is I turned my back on it and said, no, I've got to do my own thing. And then when I went and did my own thing for year after year after year, it was lonely and it was sad, and I was going broke. And
you had 3 kids, you had a wife, you had a home, you had bills, you had all these challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And did some of the things I had to do to make ends meet were, you know, one of the ways I figured I could make ends meet was doing weddings. Well, you know, I'd gone to seminary for 3 years. I'd worked at some great churches. I then had gone on to get my doctorate of ministry. All these kinds of experiences, and yet here I am, you know, in somebody's hotel on a Saturday night, you know, doing a wedding to make a quick buck, you know, so then I could go to the next town and do a wedding after that, you know. And I was just, you know, or there were a couple times I went to wedding shows in hotels, you know, and stood behind a booth and said, you know, I'm Tom the officiant, you know. And it was pretty humiliating knowing that I had gone to all these, you know, passed my tests in Greek and Hebrew and all that stuff, though barely. And that the people in the next booth who were trying to drum up business for their wedding business had gone online and gotten ordained in 10 minutes. You know, and that was really hard. I mean, I love doing weddings, but I got really tired of all the people who said, well, I'm spiritual but not religious, you know, can you do my wedding? And knowing that, frankly, I needed to do that in order to make ends meet, to keep my family going, and get this church started. Yet, as much as I struggled, for some reason, I couldn't let go of it, you know. And I will say now, I feel like the luckiest guy in the world because I'm able to to do what I feel like I'm called to do, in the way that I feel called to do it, and in the place and with the people that I feel called to serve. And I just don't know, we live in a time when a statistic I read recently is that 50% of the ministers who are serving churches right now would leave their church if they had another economic option, another way to pay the bills, but they don't know what they do if they weren't a minister, so they stay.
Wow.
And I feel like just the opposite of that. I feel incredibly fortunate. For people that I would say who are starting new churches, I'd say, get yourself a support team, and that's a mistake that I made. Second, remember that it's all about the people that you serve. So you'll be able to sit in an office somewhere, and you have the benefit of having some money coming in, but you'll think about your target population you want to meet, and you'll think about their needs, and you'll study the demographics, and you'll think about the niche and the brand you do want to develop, and what should our letterhead look like, and what should our logo look like. And you'll meet with some other ministers, and you'll tell them your vision, and you can spend full time just doing all that stuff. And that doesn't give you a single customer. Your job is not doing all that other stuff. When it's all said and done, your job is about meeting the needs of human beings and God's creation, I think in God's name. And so don't get caught up in the business of thinking that your job is starting a church. Your job is about meeting human beings' needs, and the way you do that is by starting a church or a worshiping community. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when I call you a couple months from now, my question will be, what about connections with human beings? And prospective people whose needs you can meet, or people whom you can serve. It won't be as much about, well, tell me about what your logo looks like, or who's designed what for you, or where do you have an office, or what's your lease for a space, or anything like that. Don't think that the business side of it is actually doing your job. There's all kinds of mistakes you can make. And I guess the final thought I have is figure out a way that you can be fed spiritually. Maybe I beat myself up too much, but I believe that's a mistake I made as well. And along the journey, I became very dry spiritually, and I think it's pretty hard to be convincing and enthusiastic about sharing with people this life-changing, life-giving water. If you've got a dry mouth and are dying of thirst yourself. And so I would make sure that, the old line about, well, if you want people to believe in the Redeemer you're talking about, you need to look redeemed yourself. If you're excited about faith and the God to whom you belong and sharing that story, you've got to feel that way, you've got to look that way. So, take care of yourself. Like they say on the planes, if you need oxygen, get oxygen yourself before you give it to your child.
Yeah.
Feed yourself spiritually, and then let that energy flow to others. They'll see it in you, and that will be more powerful than any words you have to say.
So frustrations for somebody starting a new worshiping community, it sounds like you're going to face some loneliness and isolation, and that's why you want a team and you want to be able to feed yourself spiritually. It sounds like you're going to make mistakes, and that sounds like it might be a good thing because it teaches you some things. And it also sounds like just because you got a degree from some prestigious institution or have these great connections, you will likely end up doing things that maybe aren't that prestigious in service of the people and of the vision.
Yeah, you kind of have to set your ego aside. And so, for example, you were at Fourth Church, tall steeple, huge staff, known around the world as an exceptional place. Well, when was the last time you went outside and trimmed the hedges on Michigan Avenue?
Did not do that.
That's something I do now.
Yeah.
When was the last time on Sunday morning that You threw your snowblower in the back of the truck because you weren't confident that the people at the college were going to snowblow the walks for the handicapped access.
Yeah.
And you knew that, Faffy Bauer, the lady in the wheelchair, loved coming to worship. And if that wasn't shoveled or cleaned up, she wouldn't be able to come.
Be able to come.
So you do that. When it's a new worshiping community, you got to roll up your sleeves and do everything. I love that because I love that variety.
Yeah.
But that's something that's not for everyone. And there's not anything in the church in our church that I don't do, and that's okay. That just goes with the territory.